Hello and welcome to the WIHS Journal, Public Affairs from 104.9. I'm Paul Kretschmer. Recently, the White House delivered a dire warning to congressional leaders that time is running out for lawmakers to approve more assistance to Ukraine, sounding the alarm that Kyiv's battlefield gains against Russia are at risk without more money. To speak about that with us, Senior Fellow and Director of the Center on Europe and Eurasia at the Hudson Institute, Peter Ralph.
Well, I certainly think that the counteroffensive's underwhelming performance, let's put it that way, at least the land offensive, has raised some doubts about the Ukraine effort. But I'm not so sure that that's the correct frame by which we should be looking at this. Undoubtedly, we need a strategy for success because I think Americans will be hard-pressed to fund the Ukrainian war effort in perpetuity. But for every dollar in support and security assistance that we've spent, the Ukrainians have really made work of the Russian military. And so for pennies on the dollar, we have degraded one of our major adversaries. And that alone, I think, is probably worth the investment. So from Ukraine's point of view, and really for the security of Europe, it might be that the counteroffensive is underwhelming and therefore problematic. They want to liberate their own territories. From a very narrow American interest point of view, however, I would say that what they've done to the Russian military alone already justifies the expense.
With a seeming increasing reluctance on the part of Republican lawmakers in the U.S. House to spend more money in that direction, are they being too narrowly focused in the concerns that they have voiced in public?
Well, I think if this Ukraine supplemental hits the floor of the House, you'll see Republicans respond and vote for it. And I'm still rather certain that a majority of not only Americans, based on recent survey data coming out of the Reagan Institute and the Reagan Foundation, but also their elected officials will support Ukraine. But no doubt, $60 billion, which is the White House request, is a big number, and there's some sticker shock associated with that. But I think basically right now we're in the middle of a legislative wrangling where the Republicans want to extract from the White House adjustments to their immigration policy, and so they're hooking Ukraine aid to that and to the Israel package. And where they all voted as standalone bills, I'm rather confident that Ukraine would pass, and I wouldn't even say that it's not going to pass if it's hooked to the others. I just think it's part of the politicking that's going on right now in D.C.
Yeah, with your time of experience as a senior fellow and director of the Center on Europe and Eurasia at the Hudson Institute, then what would you say to someone who wants to know if tying foreign affairs like that to what some might refer to as domestic problems, is that problematic to do that? Should we keep them completely separate, or is it understandable in political jousting that you'll see some link between those two broad areas?
Yeah, I don't really have a view on this. This is really, I think, the political calculation of the leadership in the House of Representatives and the Senate and the White House, and they'll have to sort all of this through. Undoubtedly, though, I would say the House Republicans and the Senate Republicans insisting on some changes to immigration policy are responding to a demand signal from the American people who have made immigration a top-tier issue. And at the same time, I would say that support for our partner in Ukraine and ally in Israel is very much so in the American national interest. Those are two tier one American security regions, the Middle East with its vast oil wealth, Israel as an important partner and tech superpower, and of course Europe, where an enormous amount of American wealth and prosperity is tied up. But just think of the foreign direct investment stock from Europe and the U.S. It constitutes something like 2/3 of the total foreign direct investment worldwide in the U.S. So trillions of dollars, and imperiling the European order, not responding to Russian aggression, I think would really raise the stakes. So I think all of these are understandable priorities. How it's accomplished is, I think, up to the politicians.
As far as that last question of mine goes, as a former director of research in the Bush administration White House, has any of your past experience in research in that role had any or much of an influence in how your mind works now in terms of sorting these kind of issues out, like aid for Ukraine?
So I worked in the Office of Strategic Initiatives in the Bush White House, and then subsequently was director of research in the post-presidential office of George W. Bush down in Dallas.
Oh.
But I would say that there are a few constants in international relations that were true then and are true now. Hard power still matters. Military force is still the basic currency of global affairs. That's been true since time immemorial, and it remains true today. On the other hand, obviously the Bush era was a different time in American politics and American life. We've since had our experiences in Iraq and Afghanistan, and now we're dealing with Ukraine and a war in Gaza. Of course, back then there were already conflicts, Israel and Lebanon, for example, subsequent incursions in Gaza. But the world has changed. That was, dare we call it, a pre-Trump era. Now we're in the Trump era, or the post-Trump era, however one wants to say it, and parties and leaders and the American public change as a result.
Yeah. As far as future developments are concerned in Ukraine, are you going to keep on watching that situation as time goes along?
Oh, very much so. I think Ukraine is an important partner. I think Ukraine's ability to check Russian aggression is in the American interest, and it's easy to lose sight of a long and grinding war because in the initial weeks and months after Russia's full-scale invasion, it kind of captured headlines and captivated everyone's attention. And it's easy to begin looking elsewhere, in particular now that we have Hamas's terror attack on Israel and Israel's response. But we shouldn't lose sight of the war in Ukraine. It matters a lot, I think, to Europe, and it matters a lot to the transatlantic alliance, the transatlantic economy, and it matters a lot to American jobs in the end. So for all those reasons, it's very important, and there are lessons we might draw from Ukraine that will matter in the battlefields of the future. So the introduction of drones, for example, as a combat tool, that we're really seeing it en masse now in Ukraine, a few years ago previewed in the Karabakh War between Armenia and Azerbaijan. And taking lessons from these, I think, will be important as well.
Considering that Russia in many ways has reverted to what some people might consider a communist way of life under Vladimir Putin, was it inevitable that at some point Putin, in your opinion, from afar, would do something like invade Ukraine and try to pull, in effect, what some people have suggested, pull the USSR back together again, starting with one country and then looking for dominoes to fall into place as time went on?
Well, he famously said at one point that the greatest geopolitical travesty of the 20th century was the collapse of the Soviet Union, and there is an imperial quality to Vladimir Putin. He is a revanchist, an imperialist. He is an offensive-minded leader, and he no doubt has had his eye on Ukraine for years. Having said that, there are many bad actors in the world. Putin might be up there in a class of his own, but the way that one keeps order is through deterrence. And while Putin might have had his eye on Ukraine, the failure of deterrence by the United States and the Europeans in the end is why he picked the moment he did and chose to go for a full-scale war that would allow him to absorb Ukraine into a Russian-controlled orbit or construct, or however he was going to play it. But the point being, deterrence failed, and so it might have been nothing is inevitable in that sense. Just as the Chinese badly would like to see Taiwan brought into under the control of Beijing and brought into the mainland, so to speak. But deterrence, to date at least, has held, and I think that's an important lesson.
With that in mind, then, to wrap our conversation, then, Peter, would you suggest perhaps then that there were some things that past American administrations, like the Reagan administration, for instance, did in an attempt to contain communism while it existed under that name, that maybe we should be doing now?
Yes, I think peace through strength is still an apt slogan. It's still a guiding principle for how foreign affairs work, how they should be conducted.
Once again, my guest today, Peter Ralph from the Hudson Institute. For further information, call us at 860-346-1049. The opinions expressed are those of the participants, not necessarily those of the staff or management of the station. I'm Paul Kretschmer for the WIHS Journal, Public Affairs from 104.9 WIHS.